Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick too, and today I wanted to bring you guys an updated version on the Shadow Rogue build, which absolutely melts if you guys have seen any of the previous videos or you have used the build yourself. The main difference between this build and the previous one is that I just made it a little bit more versatile overall, and I'm going to go over all of those changes with you guys. The benefit of this version versus the previous one is that we just have significantly more boss damage. The previous build was very good at just clearing maps as quickly as humanly possible, which it is still slightly better at, but this build overall is significantly easier to set up. You have more survivability, it's overall more consistent in terms of like higher damage output, but also having very high damage against bosses, where the previous build only having shadow skills didn't really work all that well for killing bosses. But the previous build still does work fantastically and is by far the fastest rogue build for clearing things. But ultimately, in some cases, it is definitely worth losing a little bit of clear speed for just an overall more consistent version of the build that is significantly easier to set up. So if you guys are looking for a rogue build that's going to just absolutely annihilate for you, literally the second that you get into the new season at like level 50 or something, you can slap this on. And you can pretty much use this all the way through the leveling process as well. As you can see, the build just completely owns. All right, let's just jump into things. Real quickly, the season is not out yet, so things may change when the season does come out. I find it very unlikely that this build gets changed in a significant way to where when season 1 comes out, you want to play completely differently, or the build randomly falls apart. All of the strength in this build is really just built into it, so you should be perfectly fine using this going into the season. And as always, the entirety of the build will be posted over on my website if you want to see the skill points, skill tree, etc. And also, once the season comes out, I will be updating it on the website, but I'll also probably just be making updated builds anyways. When it comes to the skills, so the main difference between this version and the previous version of the Shadow Rogue build is that I am no longer using Death Trap, and instead I am using Poison Imbuement. The reason for this, and you can actually swap this skill with pretty much anything that you want. The reason for this is that when you use Death Trap or any ultimate skill, you are somewhat pigeonholed into using like Preparation, which is the main benefit of using an ultimate skill, is basically you can just infinitely reset your cooldowns, and it works very synergistically with Shadow Imbuement, which is why using Death Trap is still a technically faster build for clearing very easy content. However, this form of the build falls off heavily when you are trying to fight bosses or mobs that have significant amounts of HP. So that's why I ended up taking off Preparation, and you're also somewhat pigeonholed. You don't really have to, but one of the benefits of not playing with Death Trap anymore is we don't feel like we're at a disadvantage not using Exposure, and we can instead go for close quarters combat with just 30% extra damage all the time, as well as giving us a massive attack speed bonus, or we could go for the damage reduction via momentum there. Death Trap is still a fantastic way to play the build, and it is still my favorite way to play the build if you're doing very easy content, but the second that you're doing harder stuff, or you need more damage against bosses, or those elites that are very tanky, Poison Imbuement ends up just being really good for a myriad of reasons. So one of the main reasons that I like to use this is just for melting bosses and simply just doing a lot of extra damage. Poison Imbuement doesn't really help us all that much when we are like generally just clearing. It is nice to have a little bit of extra damage. One of the nice things about Poison Imbuement is that because it is a damage over time, it is going to very quickly stack up Disobedience for a lot of the much needed armor, which really helps with our overall survivability on Rogue. But you just have a nice playstyle just going between Shadow Imbuement and Poison Imbuement, which I think just works very well with the build. But if you don't like Poison Imbuement, you can actually just swap this off to whatever you want. If you want to use Dark Trap for more survivability, Poison Trap for the guaranteed knockdown, even Cold Imbuement I don't really think is all that worth it. The reason that I don't really like Cold Imbuement is it does give you a good bit of extra damage, because it basically just gives you 20% extra damage when you use it, but if you use like a Legendary, this will be a little bit better. But it's not going to help you at all with bosses, and bossing is the main downside that the previous build had, and the thing that I wanted to fix the most. And Cold Imbuement is really just good if you need like a little bit more damage to kind of nuke elites. Every once in a while you will freeze with it, so it's a little bit nice for that, but ultimately I think Poison is just like, I just wanted to make a more versatile version of the build, and I think this build is exactly that. For the remainder of our skills, because I really like speed, I'm pretty much always going to go with Dash, and I don't really think it's a rogue build unless you're using Shadow Step, because you need the Unstoppable for a lot of cases if you're trying to do things very quickly. In some instances, people take this off, but ultimately I would recommend pretty much always using this. When it comes to using a basic skill, a lot of people may recommend not using it, but ultimately I've played without a basic skill, and I highly dislike it for multiple reasons. One of the main benefits using a basic skill is that you can still take advantage of the aspect of Might, which gives you a massive 20% damage reduction all the time, which is very good survivability for us, and rogues are a little bit squishy. But also, because we use a basic skill, one of the main benefits of this build versus the Death Trap one is that we get close quarters combat, which actually got buffed, so we get that attack speed and that massive damage increase. And the second that you take your basic skill off in the form of Puncture, you can no longer use this, so you just massively nerf your damage. Also, if you want to play combo points with this build, obviously you need the basic skill, which you could very easily swap to combo points with the build if that is your preferred playstyle, which we'll talk about in a bit. One of the main downsides to taking off Puncture is that you are forced to replace it with Poison Trap, and that is your only option because Puncture is a guaranteed vulnerable application, and the only other good way to get vulnerable, I guess like Concealment, but Concealment's a really long cooldown. The only other way to get vulnerable would be with the Blast Trappers aspect, which is like lucky hit, chance to make the enemy vulnerable, which overall I really hated that playstyle because a lot of the time enemies would not go into the trap. I would get very unlucky with my procs. Every once in a while, I would just be in this weird spot where I didn't kill an enemy while they were vulnerable, and then I'd be trying to rely on Poison Trap, and Poison Trap would be on cooldown, or I wouldn't have it up, and just all these other problems that arose as a result of just not using the basic skill. Having the basic skill just makes it significantly easier to play with the build, in my opinion, and there's just way too many benefits to realistically take it off. Feel free to experiment however you want. Rogue has a lot of options ultimately, but this is what I found to just be the overall most consistent version of the build, and you can very easily take this into like tier 75s and have a fantastic time with it. But it's also fantastic for just like absolutely speed clearing maps. When it comes to skill tree, again, all of this will be posted over on the website. You want to go for Puncture for the vulnerable here, and then Twisting Blades with the cooldown reduction. Some people like to play with the daze. I think it's actually really good for crowd control, but missing out on the cooldown reduction significantly lowers your like overall clear speed because Shadow Imbuement helps you clear significantly faster, and also having all your movement up. Playing without this, it just doesn't really feel nearly as good. Sturdy and Siphoning for the survivability there, and then we get Shadow Step for the guaranteed stun and the crit chance, very nice. Weapon Mastery for damage, and then we go into Dash for the crit damage debuff, which is okay, but mainly we just want the slow, which counts as a crowd control, which is good for a couple different reasons. And then we want Exploit for damage, and then Malice for even more damage, and I have Malice ranks on my amulet, so I have another 3 there, but you could also get another 3 ranks into Weapon Mastery would be pretty good as well. Then we have Shadow Imbuement, only like 1 point here, and then I go into the Shadow Imbuement Vulnerable, which is fantastic, and then 3 points into Consuming Shadows, which is a very nice energy fill for us. If you've played with the build at all, you know how good the energy feels when you just kill multiple enemies with a Shadow Imbuement. You just get full energy and you can just spam like a psycho. And then I go into the Poison Imbuement, and I actually put a few ranks in here. I go 4 ranks just to get the additional damage. You could make an argument for Debilitating Toxins, but I don't really think it's all that good when you're not using like Poison Trap, because not every enemy is going to be poisoned, so the uptime on this ends up being pretty low. You could go into like Alchemical for a little bit more attack speed. We have more than enough attack speed as it is with the build, in my opinion, and I'd rather just get more damage on this. The main reason that we're even using this is just to nuke bosses, right? So having this just be buffed up as much as possible ends up being pretty good for us, but the uptime on all the poison stuff is pretty low as we're only using it for like bosses and really tanky elites. I go 3 into Precision Imbuement, so we have 9% increased crit chance anytime that we pop the Shadow Imbuement or the poison, which is very good. 3 into Frigid Finesse, which is great because we're using the Penitent Greaves. Again, you could swap Poison Imbuement for Cold Imbuement if that is what you prefer, but keep in mind that your bossing is still going to be rather weak. Then I go 3 into Innervation for the additional energy chance. You don't really need this. You could actually take this out and go into some other stuff, but I think it's nice for just consistency with the build, and if you're still like very early on into the build, you don't have a lot of good energy gen, this is still fantastic. And then I just go 3 points into Haste for the movement speed and the attack speed, which is pretty good, and then I go into Close Quarters Combat. Close Quarters Combat is just unbelievably strong. All you need to do is just use your Puncture every like 8 seconds, make sure that you hit an enemy, and then boom, you have increased attack speed and 30% increased damage against crowd control, which is insane. But what's really nice about this is the second that you start doing harder content and you don't feel like damage is a problem, but you're dying a lot, you can just swap to Momentum, easy 20% damage reduction increase, and the movement speed if you want to just like speed clear dungeons. But the strength from Close Quarters Combat, the amount of damage you get from this is like crazy, and it feels really nice after having played Exposure for so long. But optionally, you could take the points out of Haste and Adrenaline Rush and Innervation. You can get an entire 7 points if you wanted to play something else. If you even want to go like a triple imbuement build because you're a psychopath like that, you could totally do that and then take off like Dash or something if that is your preferred playstyle. There's a lot of points to play around with here, so definitely feel free to experiment with what you like, but this is what I personally like. Now let's go over all of the legendaries. Again, all of that will be posted over on the website. So first off, the most important thing is getting the Twisting Blades orbiting on your two-hander. Not really much to talk about there. That just gives you crazy amounts of damage. And then one of the things that I changed is I actually took off Vengeful aspect. Let's see if I have one here. Yeah, Vengeful, which gives you 9% crit chance. This just doesn't work, and it hasn't worked ever. So I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry if you have this on your build right now. Take it off. I'm not 100% sure that it doesn't work, but I've tested it numerous times and I can't seem to get it to work at all. I don't know anybody that has confirmed that it works, and I see more and more rogues every day taking this off, so I've just taken it off. Very unfortunate because 9% crit chance would be unbelievably good for us because rogues don't have a ton of crit, so Unlucky. Instead, I just have accelerating, and then I actually added on the bursting venoms. This is currently bugged right now, so I just wouldn't recommend using it if you don't want to use something that is bugged, or if you are, into the season. If it's like past the 18th, this has probably been fixed. The way that it's bugged is basically you will just get more procs of this than you're supposed to. Not going to go too in depth with this, but it's very nice against bosses. You can just get resets on poison imbuement, so you can just stack up all that poison and absolutely nuke bosses. Alternatively, though, once this gets fixed, I would just put on Edge Master, because you don't really need the poison pool. It's not going to be that great for you all the time. It's really just for like a little bit of extra boss damage here and there if you get lucky, but ideally you're going to nuke the bosses instantly anyway, so Edge Master is just straight up more damage. And then for the rings, I have Ravenous here for just a ton of extra energy regen, just makes the build significantly more consistent. And then I have Umbral. Look at this ring, guys. Oh, this is the ring. But the 4 resource is very nice. You don't really need Umbral with this build because we are playing with Inner Sight, which is really just going to help us overall. But Umbral is still fantastic for just overall more consistency, and I really like having just like insane amounts of attack speed and just spamming like an absolute crazy person. Then on the amulet, I have double Shadow Step charges, which I think just works fantastically for the build. Alternatively, you could put this to something like Edge Master for a tiny bit more damage, but I like having the double Unstoppable, and the movement that you get from this is very good. Penitent Greaves is very helpful, almost mandatory with the build, because it is our guaranteed source of crowd control with the build, which overall is very good. Alternatively, though, instead of using Corruption or like the Poison Pool, you could go back to using Mangler on the gloves. I just don't have another role of this. Mangler is just a chance to daze enemies, which is pretty good, and then you can pair that with a knockdown here, so you can get a lot of extra CC with the build. Ultimately, I don't think it's all that necessary, but it is pretty helpful. But getting Corruption as a 40% roll is very good because we are using 2 imbuments, so it's really just going to buff up our poison and our shadow imbuement. And then for the survivability stuff, you just want Disobedience like always, cheats so enemies deal less damage to you when they are crowd controlled, which they aren't guaranteed crowd controlled with Penitent Greaves most of the time, and then Might for the massive damage reduction. When it comes to alternatives, you can actually swap off one of your weapons with like Edge Master or whatever else, and you can go for Ashiara's Conjar for the movement speed and the attack speed. You lose a lot of damage, like a noticeable amount of damage you will lose the second that you put this on. However, if you're doing very easy stuff, it is nice for just giving you the attack speed to just very quickly melt through stuff. Alternatively, if you want to play with combo points with this build, that's actually a perfectly reasonable thing to do. You can just slap on Condemnation instead of one of your other weapons, and then just go into combo points, and boom, the build is done. You'd want to change something in your Paragon board, which I'll get into, but that's a very easy swap. Personally, I don't like combo points. I think it slows down the build, but if you want to see like 10 million Twisting Blades, that's the way to do it. When it comes to the stats on the gear, again, all this will be posted over on the website. For the helmet, you want pretty much this exact roll. You could take the ranks off of Shadow Imbuement if you wanted to go for armor instead of for more survivability, but I just have max HP, cooldown reduction, ranks to Poison Imbuement is very good, so it just does more damage, and then ranks to Shadow Imbuement, so it does more damage. On the chest, you want total armor, damage reduction from close, and then max HP. On the gloves, you want exactly this roll. I also have like absolutely perfect gloves. My rogue has some pretty crazy gear. You want crit chance, and then ranks of Twisting Blades, and then like attack speed and crit damage with imbued skills is a fantastic thing that we can now tap into because we have 2 different imbuments. So tapping into the extra crit damage is a fantastic option for the build, and just gives us a lot of extra damage. And then for the gloves, or for the gloves, and then for the pants, we have damage reduction, damage reduction, damage reduction. You could also get like armor or max HP, and then imbuement skill cooldown reduction is fantastic. You don't really need the imbuement skill cooldown, but I like it just to have more uptime on these. And then for the boots, obviously you want Penitent. When it comes to our bow, we want to use a crossbow. Again, the damage per second on this does not matter, but the stats on it do matter. We want exactly what I have: vulnerable damage, crit damage, vulnerable damage again, dexterity, and all stats. The reason that we're going for all stats rather than damage to close or anything is because we have so much additive damage with the build, roughly like 600%, that the additional damage from the from the additive damage or core skill or whatever is actually less than the all stats give us, because all stats is literally just 80 dexterity, so 8% damage with dexterity there. But it's also going to give us intellect, or intelligence, which is crit chance, and it's also going to unlock some of our breakpoints in our Paragon node, such as Havoc, giving us an extra 15% crit damage, and also damage to elites, and also extra damage to close enemies. So it's literally just a win-win-win to use all stats instead of damage to close. Highly recommend it. Don't see nearly enough people doing this. You could alternatively swap the damage to close on your one-handers to the all stats and then have the damage to close on your two-hander. I don't think it's worth it to do it twice. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't double-checked the math on that. But for my one-handers, you want to have 2 swords because this benefits the most from weapon mastery, and you want crit damage, vuln, crit damage again, and then dexterity, and then you can either go for core skill or damage to close. Unfortunately, this roll is kind of bad that I have here, but it is what it is. On the rings, you want exactly this, crit damage, vulnerable damage, crit chance, and then I have max HP for survivability purposes, but you could actually get crit damage with imbuement skills on your rings at 31% each, so that's a lot of damage that I'm personally missing out on with the build, but I like the extra survivability, and I have 2 rings here that are nearly perfect, and I mean, this one is actually perfect, and I just absolutely love the max HP there because it really helps with rogue survivability. When it comes to the amulet, you want exactly this. Ranks 2 Malice or Weapon Mastery is your best bet for overall damage. Frigid Finesse is okay, but it's not nearly as consistent. And then you want cooldown reduction, so you just have lower cooldown on pretty much everything, which is just good for almost any build. And then I went double survivability here with damage reduction and total armor. You could go for movement speed, but I'd rather have the damage reduction here because Rogue is really squishy, so getting as much DR as possible is really good. And then instead I just went for the movement speed via haste to kind of make up for the fact that I'm losing the 20% there. But if you want movement speed cap, you would just swap out the armor here for more movement speed. When it comes to the gems, you may be wondering, why am I a dumbass and why am I using rubies? You could easily use topazes if you prefer topazes. I've just been playing with rubies recently because I wanted to see what it was like scaling my max HP. Rogue kind of has this problem where you just get one-shotted when you get into combat a lot of the time, and I felt like if I get crowd controlled a lot, like CC stunned, I'm just stunned for like 10 seconds and I have topazes on, I'm probably dead anyway. There's multiple times where, you know, that isn't the case and topazes do save your life, but I've kind of just lived with the philosophy recently that if I get crowd controlled multiple times, I'm dead. And that's why I'm using the double shadow step to prevent me from getting double crowd controlled or like stuck in a CC. So I'm just using the rubies for overall more HP. Feel free to just use topazes like always. And then on the weapons, you want the emeralds, and on your jewelry, you want all the armor, and you want as much armor as humanly possible. When it comes to the Paragon board, I have optimized this a bit more since my previous video. The main thing that I went for is I just went for more damage reduction on the board because Rogue does so much damage. There's ways that you could like swap out a lot of the damage reduction and get a ton of extra damage. There's so much damage on the Paragon board for Rogue that I'm not tapping into, but I am already tapping into a crazy amount of damage. And I just do so much damage. Like, I felt like I just wanted the survivability because I was sick of doing like tier 60s and randomly dying. And now I can very comfortably go into tier 70s and not really worry about it, which just makes me enjoy my Rogue 10 times more. Again, all the Paragon board stuff will be over on the website. The most important thing when it comes to playing with the build early is getting exploit glyph as soon as humanly possible, in which case you don't want to play exploit weakness as your second board. You would actually want to play no witness as your second board, which I currently am not using anymore, which I'll go into. But just check out the leveling version of the board. Real quickly, I'll just go over what I'm doing. Hello Kitty. So for the first board, I'm going into closer for the extra cutthroat skill damage, but mainly this is just for the damage reduction. And I don't have all the points for it, but most of it. And then for the next board, I go exploit weakness, with just a crazy amount of extra damage for us. You could actually swap the 15% and go for more movement speed in the form of Hunter Killer if you would prefer, but this just helps us for our bossing potential. And I got some nodes that I really like, which is just a ton of damage reduction versus vulnerable. I'm a huge fan of that. And then there's also a lot of vulnerable damage right here, which I really like. And then you can also get combat completely maxed out with 49 int, and you can get even more vulnerable damage there, which is great. You can get some potion healing, but that's kind of crap. On the next board, we go for cheap shot, which is just so much damage for us. And there's also a lot of damage reduction versus slowed enemies here. And there's also control, which you can max out almost, which is a ton of extra damage and even more damage versus crowd controlled. This board existing is pretty much the main reason that we want to use Penitent Greaves, because there's so much damage reduction against crowd controlled, damage to crowd controlled, even more like crit damage to crowd controlled. And there's also a crazy amount of damage reduction from elites, which previously I didn't have, but I felt this was really nice. But if you're speed farming, you could take all these points out of damage reduction from elites and actually go into damage to crowd controlled for even more damage. For the next board, we have Tricks of the Trade. If you're using combo points, you want to grab Tricks of the Trade, which is very easy to do here. You would probably just take some points out of damage reduction down here, and then you grab Tricks of the Trade for a massive damage increase. But I really like this board because it's very easy to grab your glyph here, and there's also a lot of crit damage here, which is pretty good, and damage reduction and damage to close enemies, and the damage to elites, which is great. And then we just go for turf. One of the ways that I lost damage but kind of gained survivability was I was previously using the no witness board, and I was going down a little bit here to get like a tiny bit of crit and stuff. You could also do the same thing in this board for core skill damage, which is actually technically a little bit better than the crit was. and it's a bit more point efficient because you can get exploit maxed out with 49 strength here, and it doesn't cost you too many points. You get a little bit of armor on the way as well. But again, ultimately, you have like 600% additive damage. It's not a big deal to lose a little bit of it. I know it doesn't feel good to lose damage. I don't like losing damage, but the survivability, oh my god, the quality of life is just really nice. But if you want to min-max it, just know that there's ways that you can very easily take some points out of damage reduction, particularly up here, and you could slam those points into like Hunter Killer for movement speed, damage to elites, and slam the points into damage crowd controlled. Or again, if you're playing combo points, you would just go into tricks of the trade. Sorry for all the options. I just wanted to fully explain the entirety of the Paragon board so you guys know what's going on. Alright, now I'll just show you guys a little bit of gameplay with the build. Unfortunately, the highest key that I have on me is a 63, but I streamed myself doing a pretty good amount of 70s with the build, and it's pretty good for that. I mean, you do a lot of damage, and the survivability is pretty nice. The healing in Blind Burrows is a little bit annoying because there's a lot of just poison damage overall, but Rogue is really, really fun in Blind Burrows because you actually just like nuke everything. When it comes to actually playing with the build, there's not really all that much to it. I'd recommend just like puncturing every once in a while. Kitty doesn't like it when I make videos. I'd recommend just puncturing every 8 seconds or whatever, just so that you can proc, actually 6 seconds, so that you can proc Might, and you can also just proc your Close Quarters Combat there. As you can see, everything just gets absolutely annihilated, even with the Poison Imbuement, and you can pretty much just run through, and yeah, it's really nice. This is a particularly good dungeon because you just get so much cooldown reduction. But even on like a 63, as you can see, everything literally gets one-shotted. My energy regen is just really, really nice here. And there I got a poison reset from my poison imbuement. You can see I just get infinite poison resets with the one legendary, but again, that is going to get patched, so I wouldn't really get too used to it. And the poison imbuement is just there for a little bit of extra damage. It's not going to massively help when we're clearing. And Death Trap would be faster if I were to try to do this exact dungeon, because with Death Trap, you just get the infinite resets, right? But I'm still moving through here pretty quickly. And overall, it's just really nice. I'm very cozy. With my previous build, every once in a while, I would still die to poison and stuff. But with the way that I have it set up now, I still do crazy damage, right? The damage is actually higher than it previously was. I just don't have Shadow Imbuement, Shadow Imbuement, Shadow Imbuement, Shadow Imbuement constantly, which is why I still like the Death Trap version more. It's still more fun. But with the Death Trap version, I don't have as much survivability. As you can see, my Disobedience is at 100 almost all the time because of the poison ticking. And when I get to the boss, I'll actually be able to kill the boss. Every once in a while, boss damage doesn't matter that much. Not having Death Trap or playing the Death Trap build and having your boss damage be weak, it's not that big of a deal. But it was just a little annoying because sometimes the Butcher would pop up and I'd just be miserable, and you'd have to hot swap to Inner Sight. And I don't know, I think this build is just fantastic for you're literally level 60, you have terrible gear, your build isn't very set up very well, you don't have an Umbral Ring or whatever, and you don't have much cooldown reduction or anything. You just slap this on and you're really good. The Death Trap version is more of really good for just speed farming, and once everything is super easy for you and your gear is really good, I think that version is definitely better for just doing stuff really easily. But if you want to take the build into 70s or something, Death Trap won't feel as good. And this build with the survivability and everything, the overall more boss damage or damage against really tanky elites, just really nice. I'm actually gonna die to poison, dude. Look at the amount of poison damage in this dungeon is ridiculous. You pretty much have to rely on siphoning strikes healing you. But I mean, this is a 63. It's not too high, but as you can see, everything just gets annihilated. And when it comes to the boss, my damage on bosses, it's not super impressive, but it's way better than it was. And pretty much just want to pop your poison imbuement and then you just spam. And hopefully you get lucky with resets. I didn't get a reset. Oh, there we go. There we go. You got a reset, and you want to make sure to just puncture every once in a while. The boss damage, again, it's not crazy, but that was 2 times faster. Yes, my favorite unique, a Razor Plate. It's 2 times faster than it would have been with Death Trap, right? That's pretty much it for the gameplay. Hopefully you guys did enjoy, and let me know down in the comments if you enjoy the build. I don't even have my glyph at 21. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.